Say. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. This is Firoz Manji from Daraja Press. Welcome to Organizing in the Time of COVID. We have two guests today from New Orleans. We have Nana Fofie Bashir and Dorise Blackmon. Nana Fofie is a child of Black migrants from the south and Somali nomads from the east. She's a facilitator and a multimodal artist rooted in New Orleans. She invites ritual examination, story, and play in her work to vision, strategize, and practice liberation in community and movement spaces in the Gulf South and across the US. Nana Fofie provides expressive arts therapy with the Institute of Ashé Movement and is a founding partner of Wind and Warrior, a cultural and healing arts collective. The second guest joining her is Dorise Blackmon. Dorise is a musician and a retired public school teacher who has lived in New Orleans for 20 years. She owns and operates a small construction operation in New Orleans that she began after Hurricane Katrina to provide construction training and jobs and housing and with her community. Both are organizers, both have a deep understanding of the nature of New Orleans. And so I'm very pleased to welcome our guests, Dorise and Nana Fofie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
It's great to have you. Thanks for sparing time to come with us. So let's start. Enacting liberation, Black wellness, freedom. Why? These are things all of us would want. So how do you help?
No, you go. You start.
I think the first thing is that we don't help. We engage. The liberation is all of ours. It is reciprocal, it is mutual, and it is something that is needed by everyone. So it's not anything for anyone to help with. It's something for us all to engage in, to dig up, to learn, and to practice and live in the vision of what it is that we want. There's a lot of work, important work, to break down and to move through the systems that are harming us and that are not working for us. And it is equally important, though, to have an understanding of what it is that we want to build and what we're working towards, and to actually also live in that and feel in that so that we know what to do when we get there.
So you're involving communities around New Orleans. How do they get to know you? What are their aspirations?
Well, as a musician, playing for a number of different community events, there's a constant connect with people who not only want to, just provide the art of the expression of music, but there's also what inspires a lot of what the artist created upon in a city like New Orleans, where there's, just a lot of, poverty, and there's a lot of homelessness, and this is complicated with mental health issues, and there's no lines for it. It's a blur of how these things overlap into each other, and for a long time I played in the streets, so I was directly communicating with homeless people all the time, and a lot of veterans, a lot of just people who really had a lot of different struggles, and it's just part of why I think New Orleans in music is just a constant expression is because there's just such a need to express the blues, you know, on so many different levels. There's the blues, you know, it's just there. It's in the poems, it's in the music, it's in the visual art. It's just part of a reality. And having that lineage of it here is just, it's almost, it's real necessity. It's real necessity for maintaining such a defense against just severe political attacks.
So help our viewers understand a bit more about New Orleans, which was hit really severely by Katrina. And my understanding is that as a result, the population of Black folk in New Orleans has been devastated. It's been halved. I don't know. Give us an understanding of
it's Katrina is so similar to COVID. It just doesn't matter what the tool is to disrupt the population of color in Louisiana. I mean, it could extend further into Mississippi, Alabama. You know, it just doesn't matter. But like specifically in New Orleans, there's, you know, and in most cities in America where real estate becomes valuable and the culture is seemingly up for sale in a capitalist society, you just, you know, there's just a constant kind of, I don't know, racist division of the haves and the have-nots, and you just get pushed. You're pushed. You're pushed out in so many ways. The healthcare system, the education system, the real estate system, the banking system, it's consistent. It's consistent.
And I want to also take this time right now to honor the fact that I am not from New Orleans. And Dorise has been here for 17, 18 years. So she actually lived through Katrina here. I did not. And so everything that I speak, I want to honor the fact that I am not one of the people who is from here. There are incredibly strong voices and powerful voices of wisdom and resilience and knowledge and art who are from here. But I have been traveling back and forth to New Orleans for most of my adult life and moved here a few years ago and have been working in community since then. And one thing that I do want to mention of the folks who are here is that it was not Katrina, you know, that did the most damage. Katrina was a major hurricane, but it was the policies that caused the displacement. You know, it was the criminalization. There are people who are still in prison from the criminalization, from the rampant violence and brutality of the police force and of incarceration that happened. And we're coming upon the 15-year, we're about to mark the 15-year anniversary of Katrina. There are still families that have not returned home. I heard the word exodus earlier, and exodus has an implication that there was a choice. And it was not an exodus, it was displacement. And we talk about gentrification all over the country, and that word has lost a lot of its meaning, and it's really important to name where there was displacement. And in New Orleans, there was displacement because people were not allowed back in their homes, in their home areas. There was displacement because there is not recognition of the many different ways that we pass down land and that we pass down home ownership. There was displacement because there was incredible corruption around who got funds and who got assistance after Katrina and since then, and that continues to happen in hurricanes. And of course, I also, as we're talking about land, want to honor the Huma Nation, the indigenous people of these lands, and the Choctaw, and the Huma Nation, which is in incredible peril right now in terms of climate change, and in the process of trying to avoid the displacement of 30,000 strong of the Huma Nation right now. So there's really a lot to discuss. And when Dorise says it's a tool, COVID has the potential, and we see the disaster capitalism that is happening right now, of having this of being used in the same way of a tool of displacement and of a power grab that Katrina had.
Help us understand how COVID is manifesting itself, how it's causing an additional pressure on displacement.
And again, I'm really tied to make sure that we're not using passive language, because COVID is a virus. You know, what's causing are the policies. What's causing are intentional choices, because it's great that we are sending out messages about people staying home. What we're not doing is talking about for how many people that's not an option. You know, we're doing lip service around who's an essential worker, but how are we truly honoring them? You know, the policies are showing them as expendable, not essential. So the Black folks here, we are disproportionately affected by Corona because we have always been, and I can say we because I'm a Black person in this country anywhere, and certainly in New Orleans, always been historically disaffected in terms of healthcare, always been historically disaffected in terms of the criminalization. Once again, just like we saw in New York, the difference between how the policies and the stay-at-home orders are enforced or not enforced. We have always been disproportionately disaffected by the environmental justice. So even before the massive ways that we're seeing climate change affect us right now, environmental injustice in this area, this is one of the places to truly study and understand the disproportionate ways that choices of policy, choices of industry affect Black and Brown and Indigenous communities in terms of healthcare. And so I just real quick, when they talked about COVID and again, expendable, saying, oh, it's only if you have pre-existing conditions, it's only, or underlying conditions. You're in a place like New Orleans where because of policies like that, so many people have these conditions, people who have asthma, people who have respiratory conditions. That's what makes people disproportionately vulnerable to the virus. And again, not the virus, because of policies, because of choices, and because of systems who are not serving entire populations.
So like somebody said on an earlier program that we did, it's not so much the underlying health problems, but the underlying wealth problems that is creating the situation. In other words, we're talking about a manifestation of a fundamentally racist structure that is America, that you cannot understand the nature of America, I would argue, without actually understanding that in its profound history.
That's not even arguable. Unless people are absolutely choosing not to know anything about this country, that what you just said is not, it's not even it's objective.
And it's never explained that way.
Right.
It's never, when you look at the mass media information body, that's where you don't get the perspective that gives a better lens, I would say, to a democratic voice, the voice of the people. And we're going to see that, you know, we've seen that in maybe in an extreme way in this battle for democracy. But the battle for democracy, again, it's not just about voting, but it's about having the voice and the media and the view to understanding people, not just this particular group or, you know, the ones in power with the wealth.
I mean, some people express it as saying that what COVID is doing is lifting the veil from our eyes to be better see the nature of this racist society. But people like yourselves know it. You have an experience of it. So whose eyes is the veil being removed from?
Well, that's been such an interesting point actually before COVID. Since the election of the current administration, we've been hearing that actually. For that the veil is being removed, that people are being able to see what's really happening. What I'm hoping is that I don't know that we need so much at this point of veil removal as people listening. Because like you said, there have been people who are quite aware of the way these systems actually function, and of the way that they affect populations, of course, specifically Black and Brown and Indigenous populations, and undocumented populations, who, by the way, are also incredibly suffering right now and are not getting the same relief, the same attention, and certainly not the same sympathy and empathy. And also our incarcerated populations, who talk about expendable. It's an absolute disgrace, the fact that we are even leaving folks who are on a small charge in petri dishes, where we know they're not going to have proper health care. So there's an unveiling right now, hopefully, where people are seeing it. I don't have too much optimism in that because, again, what's needed is for people to listen, because there's still too much desire to go back to normal. And if you are really having the veil lifted and really seeing what's happening, then my hope is that you don't have a desire to go back to normal. Hopefully, if the veil is being lifted, then we're seeing all of the things that need to change. And we're seeing that this has actually been the normal all along. And it can't just be important when these certain people are affected by it.
But that presupposes, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think there's what is normal returning to? And I mean, do we not have a choice? Either we let them define what the future might hold, or we have to define it ourselves. And under those conditions, the key issue seems to me is one of organizing. And one of the reasons I was very keen to meet with you and to invite you on this program is to get some understanding of what does it mean to organize under conditions of COVID? What is it? You're naming the Black, the Brown, the Indigenous, the homeless, and so on, the undocumented. All of these people these are humans. How do they express their humanity? How do they reclaim their humanity? How do they organize? How can we organize in a time of COVID? What does it mean? And how much of that is going on?
I really want Dorise to speak to this because words like organizing and activism, people have a lot of fear and a very limited view on what those can look like. And really, it is being in community. It's meeting community. The mutual aid that is happening right now across this country, which really just means, hey, let me meet my neighbor. Let me see what my neighbors need. Let's see who has what and how we can exchange to meet each other's needs. Knowing the system is not going to do that. How do we step in and do that? And that is organizing. And it is also when you talk about undocumented communities and communities who are not being heard and suffering more. It's also, how do I take a look at where I have more privilege, where my voice might be heard more, where I might have more in my pantry, any of that, to be able to make sure that I'm also stepping in to recognize where we can do this with equity and where I can use my voice. And how Dorise came into what she's doing with housing and after Katrina, I think really speaks to that. You don't have to think that you're a political activist or an organizer or a cat like Pele who has to say hello.
Hi.
Know how to step into community and organize.
So yeah, Dorise.
there's a kind of invisible economy that has allowed African Americans, in the face of overwhelming odds, to survive. And time and again, as a child, growing up, I thought that protesting and going on marches and doing all these things was organizing. And then you see so many other layers of how people really work together and create rules of respect and efficiency that help us to continue to survive. The media, per se, right now in New Orleans is null and void. There's really no newspapers. If you're not on Facebook, or if you are, that, however that defines itself, but, do you have a computer? Do you have access to Wi-Fi? Do you have money to pay your bills to even, get into the science of any of these things and people are talking and trying to discern hand by hand by hand how to best every day try to help people and connect with people and to figure out survival. You're not on a farm, you're not in a fishing community, you're in a city where that grocery store or whatever is dependent upon, that you're dependent upon to get food or to do whatever, or, the food banks to distribute food. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And I think, and to that point, it's Facebook and the social media. There's actually been a small good thing in terms of how we have been finding new ways to connect. And it's just as it's more important. If you walk outside your door, we have really, we have lost the art in many ways in this culture of knowing our neighbors. And that is the first thing about organizing. It's building relationships, it's knowing your neighbors, because we do need to be able to trust each other. We need to know what we can barter and exchange and how we can come together and work together if someone or if our entire neighborhood is in need. And we need to know the fact that, we're not on a farm, but this person down there grows this food. And I know that community down there is a great fishing community for if the supply chain does, not serve us for a while. It's important for us, first of all, to know what we already have. We already have so much in our communities, and if we get to know each other, then we'll know how many resources and how much richness is actually available for us to exchange and to work together and organize around. So that's the first and the most important thing. And getting to know each other also helps to reduce fear and helps to reduce us contributing to the criminalization and the isolation.
I think what you're raising is a really important issue, because I think it reminds me of Michelle Alexander's piece some months ago in the New York Times. She tried to explain that we are not the resistance, that we are in part of a movement trying to create a new world. Yes. It is they who are the resistance to those who are trying to create the mutual aid, to create the conditions of a new relationship with people, to support each other and to create that new world. So I think, it's really important that organizing is not seen merely as demonstrating, which is oppositional,
Right.
But what I hear you're saying is it is fundamentally propositional. Am I right?
It's fundamentally proposition. It's fundamentally building. It's fundamentally community building. At its core, if you anyone who is a good organizer knows that the first, second, third, and last step is always relationship building and community building, because if nothing else, those networks and how we know each other is how we're going to build whatever it is that we need.
And it's got to be done in a free society. You've got to be free.
So Dorise, help us understand how music plays into this.
Well, for the most part, I think when I could define and talk about different songs or this or that, but I think there's an overwhelming identity with African American identified music, at least, and maybe some other groups, but for African Americans, there's a language that's at a different plane of it's a little higher than just our physical day-to-day expressions, and this idea of being able to possess and connect time and space and elevate our where we're at now, whether we're in a prison, whether we're in a beach, whether we're in a city, whether we're on a farm. Those things aren't as important as the spiritual elevation that music can provide. And that's whether it's, I don't know, gospel music or blues, or there's code in it. And it allows that frequency to be carried to others. And if you're open to it and, connected with it, it's a beautiful thing. And I mean, I can't even say how or what the next phases of music will look like after this, because music has really shut down a lot in New Orleans. I've never, I don't know of anything that's ever done like this. So much of New Orleans on the basic plane is just in tourism and entertainment, and there's so much, but so much has been stopped from so many avenues of how people barter and exchange and survive, and I don't know, have certain self-esteem and notoriety and everything else. It's like even just these few months of just being without that are going to reflect and clear and present new configurations. I'm very excited about it because I'm hearing some things that are happening, and people are online and starting to, get, but these, there's this new generation of people coming in who are going to bring those spiritual things to this new event in ways that not even people who've been older and, and I'm not trying to divide it by age, but just it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time in terms of music. It's this, I don't see it as any, it's not, there's no stopping. There's no stopping it artistically. Music, poetry,
Nana Fofie.
Mm-hmm. I think also there's two, like, absolutely. And how music and art, but especially in this town where music is the blood, music is the ground, music is the soil. Music helps us vision and be in that. When we started this off talking about how to actually practice and be in that freedom that Dorise was mentioning, or that liberation, or whatever it is we're visioning, music, first and foremost, music is medicine. Music is how we tell our stories and have them reflected back to us. Because when we talk about populations who are disproportionately oppressed and marginalized, that also means having our voices and our experiences shut down, or not heard and seen. And so it's also that validation, that affirmation of having your story reflected back to you. And when Dorise used to play in the French Quarter, people who didn't even know to name it like this would call it medicine and healing. Because just being able to take that moment and plug into a different vision and a different energy other than the conditioning and the day-to-day and the work, and especially if we're only focused on this one very limited and exhausting way of living, that when we're presented with art that takes us into this whole other space, that is medicine for us and that is vision for us. And when we talk about organizing, art and music are critical, because they show us what's possible and they have us tap into the part of ourselves that know it's possible.
Is it possible that I invite you to give us a song or a poem?
Oh.
I can do it.
I should have warned you. Sorry.
Yeah, that was. We were caught a little bit off guard. I can try and find something to read while she does a song. Is there anything you want to do?
No.
Or maybe not. we aren't really set up right now.
I don't think.
Okay.
Maybe we can come back and do something.
Yeah, let's try and plan that. I think that would be. I think in the time of COVID, we need that kind of nourishment. So I think I speak for many. Dorise, explain because I'm sure many people watching this program will want to know your T-shirt and what's written on it. No guacamole for immigrant haters.
So speaking of the power of art, this is actually from a theater company. Jose Torres Tama is an incredible writer, performer, poet, and he does pop-up theater. They have actually an entire group that they do pop-up theater with musicians and poets and singers and visual art that they'll also collaborate with. And so this T-shirt is actually a part, comes out of the work of Taco Truck Theater, Teatro Sin Fronteras. So shout out to Jose.
So why no guacamole for them?
Well, I think when the shirts came out, it was a time when people were really talking about this. This was around the border wall and getting rid of all immigrants or closing the borders. And so there's a whole production that he does about it, but it's, just how Americans, or, the non-immigrant Americans, if that can even be possibly thought of, but the people who don't consider them guacamole makers want to eat it, but don't want the makers of the guacamole to come in.
And to the point that Dorise was talking about music in New Orleans, I also want to point out that while I also am nourished by the incredible art and the music that we know will come out of this, at this time will inform in ways that will lead us towards future visions. That point is part of a larger point of dominant culture here in this country and in New Orleans wanting to extract from culture without respecting the humanity that accompanies that culture. So whether it is Latinos and Chicanos around guacamole, but wanting to build some ridiculous border, or whether it's the new gentrification, the newest iteration of gentrifiers here in New Orleans that moved to New Orleans that they know is the Crescent City of music, but then want to start to enact laws that they don't want the music on their corner. So now they want to actually start, criminalizing Black boys for doing exactly what Black boys have been doing in this city for eons and generations. So there's this larger issue of this culture wanting to extract without recognizing humanity, without honoring, and certainly without being inclusive.
So, any final messages you would like to convey to people watching this program?
It's twofold. I really want to acknowledge the incredible time of grief. I want to acknowledge our collective and personal grief around what is happening right now, the stress and the trauma, that this is a unique time, that I do invite us all to just make sure that we tap into the fact that this is happening. And it is difficult because it is unknown, it is uncertain. And alongside of that, I also really want to invite us all that this is actually also that moment where we are called and to build that newness. The newness always comes out of the difficult transformation, and this is what that opening right now. So the changes that we want to see, this is the time to build them. This is the time to dream them, to write them, to sing them, to meet your neighbor and discuss them, and to work towards them. Because this is the opening. So taking care of our grief and recognizing and validating our grief and preparing and having some inspiration and excitement for what we can all build.
I think that's such an important issue that you've raised here. I'm really pleased you have, because in so many conversations that I've had, the word afterwards is being raised. And it is today, it is now, because the after will only be after we've organized, after we've given birth.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really important message. Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on this show. It's been a really pleasure to meet you. I wish we could meet face to face. But one day we will. Yeah. And I look forward to hearing your music as well.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. We're excited about all that. Thank you so much for having us and for the conversation.
It's been great. You take care and keep building that new world.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what an inspiring conversation with Dorise and Nana Fofie. Thank you for joining us today on organizing in the time of COVID. We are closing for the weekend, and we'll be back on Monday with a range of people who will be speaking with us over the next week. Keep an eye out on our Facebook page and on our website from Daraja Press. And thank you again for joining us on this show. This is Feroz Manji from Daraja Press signing off for the weekend.